It is now Tuesday, January the 31st. I can't believe. Happy New Year to everyone. I think this is our first meeting of the new year in 2023 as the Metropolitan Transit Commission. This is a special meeting that we had to work around several of the dates that are going on and the activities that we had during the month of January. So I want to call this meeting to order. And thank you for everyone that's attending. I think it might be a good idea so that we can recall who we all are. We all have the signed document for the representation that's required, but I thought we would just start with the Mayor of Cornelius and go around the table and introduce everyone at the table. And I'd also like for you to meet the staff and where the staff works and have them participate in the introductions as well. So, Cornelius.
Thank you. My name is Woody Washam, and I am Mayor of Cornelius.
I'm Rusty Knox. I'm Mayor Davison.
Brent Cagle, Interim CEO, CATS.
Vi Lyles, Mayor of Charlotte and Chair of the MTC.
Lee Altman, Mecklenburg County Commissioner, serving at large.
Good evening, John Higdon, Mayor of Matthews.
Melinda Bells, Mayor of Huntersville.
Jack Edwards, Mayor of Pineville.
Brad Simmons, Mayor of the town of Mint Hill.
Brian Welch, Mint Hill Town Manager.
Edward Tillman, Chair of CTAG.
Chrissy Exlin, Chair of TSAC.
All right. Mr. Smith, we'll start with you.
Alan Smith, Deputy Director of Transit, Chief Operating Officer, CATS. Chad Howe, Interim CFO, CATS.
Brad Thomas, City Attorney's Office.
Marcy Nelson, HR Manager, CATS.
Brandon Hunter, Interim Director of Marketing and Communications, CATS.
Jason Lars, Director of Planning, CATS.
Kelly Goforth, Director of Development, CATS. Rachel Gregg, Head of IT for CATS. Liz Batson, City of Charlotte, Assistant City Manager.
Orlando Rouse, Civil Rights Officer, CATS.
Maria Green, Marketing Manager for CATS. Good evening, Catherine Coomer, Sustainability and Governmental Affairs Officer.
And Monica CATS, I'm the Senior Budget Manager. Paul Small, Executive Assistant.
All right, thank you, everyone. I know these are the folks that make this possible for us to have these meetings that are organized, and I do also know that we have a Charlotte Mayor Pro Tem joining us tonight, Braxton Winston. Introductions there, and I expect that we've got a few other visitors that we will meet later on. So thank you all for being here this evening. Okay, so we also want to recognize those that are online or joining us online. So if we can start with our greetings to the Gastonia Mayor.
Hi, I'm Walter Reed, Mayor of the City of Gastonia.
Our Mayor of Concord.
Bill Dush, Mayor of Concord. Good to see everyone.
And I know we have one of our managers on board, as well as, I want everyone that's online to introduce themselves. So, Andrew?
Thank you, Mayor. Andrew Grant, Town of Cornelius Manager.
Okay.
Penny Roberts, Town Manager, Huntersville.
Okay. Bill?
Bill Funberg, Mooresville Representative.
Okay, and I think Doc Russell works in our communications, and he's doing all of our visual work. And so, LJ?
Yes, Mayor, this is LJ Waslowski. I'm the Transit Director for Concord, Kannapolis Area Transit, and work with Mayor Fish. Glad
to have you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We have a full agenda tonight. And we've got some informational items and some action items, but the first thing that we need to start with is a selection of the Vice Chair, and I'd like to recognize Mayor Knox.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to nominate Mayor John Higdon as the Vice Chair of the MTC for 2023.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any other nominations? Hearing no additional nominations, by a raise of our hands, may we have a vote for Mayor Higdon to continue as Vice Chair? All right, those are the voting members unanimously are selected. Mayor Higdon, thank you very much
Thank you.
for doing this.
Appreciate your confidence.
All right. Now we'll need to move to the approval of the minutes of November the 16th, and you have a copy that was distributed to you. The minutes are on page 5 through 9 of the briefing book. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any questions or comments, any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor of approval of the minutes, please raise your hands. All the voting members are yes. All right, so the next thing that we will have is Brent Cagle, who is the interim CEO of CATS, is going to give us the CEO report.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Lyles. So first of all, this is my first MTC meeting. I'm glad to be here. I am your new interim CATS CEO. My name is Brent Cagle. I've been with the City of Charlotte for about 10 years. I am full-time or non-interim and assistant city manager with the City of Charlotte. Before that was the aviation director, and now I'm interim CEO of CATS. Little bit of comments. So I know that there have been some questions, concerns about the possibility of a transit operator strike. I'm sure that we've all seen in the media this week the report that a tentative agreement has been reached. I will note that the City of Charlotte is not a party to the agreement. It is an agreement between RATP Dev, the contractor, and the transit union, the operators union. So we are not a party to the agreement or to the negotiations that are ongoing. But we do take it as a good sign that both parties are negotiating in good faith and that they have apparently come to a tentative agreement. I will note that a tentative agreement is not a final agreement, but we are certainly very optimistic and hopeful that that tentative agreement will be ultimately approved by the union. It's our understanding that that vote will occur this week, and so we should know more next week related to the outcome of the vote. But again, we take it as a good sign that both parties are operating or negotiating in good faith. The other thing I wanted to do real quickly, I know we have a loaded agenda, but just talk to you a little bit about I guess my first 60 days. I assumed the interim CEO position December 1st upon Mr. Lewis's resignation or last day in November. So I have been working, first of all, to get to know everyone, right? To learn the faces, all of the team here tonight, but also have spent a lot of time out with our field operations, with our field groups. Across all of our shifts, CATS is a 24/7 operation, so we have employees literally working all day, all night, every day of the week. So really went out to speak to them, understand what they love about their job and what their concerns are. I will say the first thing I learned is we have a lot of great people working at CATS who love working there, who really, they take pride in what they do, and they're proud of working for the city, working for CATS, and serving the community every day. So that was good. I will also say there are some concerns, right? We have some things that we can do better as management of CATS, and we're committed to do that. Things like communication with our employees about the decisions we make, about budget decisions, about operating decisions, and being able to support them in our budget decisions. And so that has been the second thing that has been front and center for me for the first 60 days, and for Chad Howell, our interim CFO, is really preparing our 2024 budget, getting it prepared. Chad will provide an update tonight on that. We're not done yet, but I will say in the last 60 days, we have really put a lot of energy into thinking about this budget, making sure that it's a balanced budget, and then really focusing on a few priorities. I don't want to steal Chad's thunder, so I'll stop there and just say that has been very, very important. And then, of course, the last thing is making sure that whether it's day-to-day operations or the major projects that we have on the horizon, that really CATS doesn't miss a beat, right? That we keep moving forward because the work we do is so important. And I think we've done that and we'll continue doing that.
All right. Any questions for Brent? Okay. Thank you for your report, Brent. Now we'll next have the report from the Transit Service Advisory Committee, and Ms. Ashland will present, and I think she also has an introduction to make.
Yep, thank you, Mayor Lyles and members of the MTC. I'd like to introduce everyone to Jarrett Herms. You want to raise your hand? Jarrett was elected TSAC co-chair for 2023. He and I will be alternating at MTC meetings this year, so you'll see him in this seat next month. Welcome to Jarrett. In December, TSAC held a joint meeting with the Bicycle Advisory Committee for Charlotte, where we discussed the overlap between the needs of transit riders and the needs of cyclists. There's a lot of overlap, and we look forward to more collaboration with them. We're also planning to collaborate with CTAG, whose chair, Edward Tillman, sitting next to me. He will be attending our next TSAC meeting, and then Jarrett and I will be attending their next meeting. We feel we can better advocate for the needs of transit riders by working together. In our January TSAC meeting, we met Brent Cagle and heard an update on the contingency plans should there be a bus strike. And, you know, if the news reports are accurate, it looks like we may avert that, so that's great news all around. We were also thrilled that there will be increased frequency on the Blue Line starting next week during peak hours. Many people have reached out to members of TSAC to complain about crowding on the Blue Line, so this will, as a good first step towards alleviating that. We also took a straw vote on the CTC redevelopment because there had been an inquiry about, you know, what do TSAC members think about the CTC redevelopment options, and so we did like a straw vote so I could share with you how people feel about the different options. And we had 4 people who preferred the concourse underground option, and 2 of us preferred the elevated terrace option. And unfortunately, we didn't have time to review the Silver Line uptown alignments and hold a straw vote on that, but there's lots of opinions on it. Finally, while all the mayors are here, we have a lot of open positions on TSAC, and so I wanted to let you know that we're looking for members for a lot of spots, and I'm going to follow up after this meeting with an email to each of you where there's an open seat. So we have one for Huntersville, we have one for Pineville, Mint Hill, Davidson, Cornelius, Mayor Washam, I think there may have been someone who's already reached out to you who's interested. Matthews, I think there also might be somebody in the works for that open seat. We have an open seat for a van pool rider. That has been open for a long time. It's hard to fill that spot. We have a seat open to be appointed by the Mecklenburg Board of County Commissioners. And we also have a seat recently vacated to be appointed by Charlotte City Council for a local or express bus rider. And I'd like to stress that for this county and Charlotte City Council appointed seats, this is an opportunity to get more local bus riders represented on TSAC, as well as to get broader representation from areas of Charlotte where we don't have members, such as the West Side. That concludes my remarks. I will follow up with an email to each of the mayors with open seats, and thank you for your time.
Eddie, I have a question on the appointments. I always appreciate recommendations, and if you send the email and if you have someone that you believe would be a really good candidate, please, I think all of us would appreciate getting that kind of information if you have it. And I know sometimes it's hard to get these designated seats, and I know also as people have lives, or most of us. Some of us. So with that. But are there any other questions for Ms. Ashland? All right, thank you very much. Now we'll go to Mr. Tillman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For my report from our January 17th meeting, we had an introduction to Interim CEO Mr. Cagle, as well as received a preliminary budget report from CFO Mr. Howell. Due to their recent appointments, as in December, it's clear we did not have as much of a robust conversation as they were getting up to speed with those items. So certainly during our next meeting come February, we'll probably have a little more meat on that conversation at that point. We also received a presentation from Mr. Lawrence regarding the CTC redevelopment and the LPA recommendation, which we do have a action item on that this evening. So we was a little bit of a light meeting there, and we still, just as Chrissy talked about with her group, we have 3 open seats on our CTAG group. We've got the co-chair, which will be helpful for me, as well as a Met County appointee and a CMS appointee also. So not nearly as many, but certainly still the support would be greatly appreciated.
Okay, so Met County and CMS, and we don't have a representative from CMS here tonight, so we'll have to, if you can get that over to, I guess, the interim superintendent, that might be helpful.
Okay. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Tillman? Hearing none, thank you very much. We do have 2 people signed up to speak tonight. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak to the MTC membership. And the first speaker that we have is Josh Benner. Mr. Benner, please come. You can join us at the podium right here, and that will, so that you can be heard. I feel like we're like a long way away tonight.
Hi, thank you. So I am Josh Benner. I'd like to talk about the MTC redevelopment, or the CTC redevelopment. Sorry, we're at the MTC. I just want to start with that it is just, I'm a little frustrated. It's kind of a bold-faced lie that this is a transit-focused project. Even in it says that you guys were approached from a developer about development, and I'm for development, but if this is our transit center, and it's the most important transit center in our whole entire city, we need to focus on transit. I can tell that some options clearly weren't put out from a transit point of view. Part of my issue is with the concourse design. We're going to end up having 3 different levels of transit between the blue line, the buses, and the gold line. Why aren't we considering putting the concourse design on the 2nd level, so it is the same exact design, just on the 2nd level, so it still has the climate control, the security, but the transfers between the blue line are the most important. That's completely just being disregarded. You can tell it's by the development. If they want to put parking, put it in the basement of this building. Part of it has the CTC. But we really should not be putting people in the basement just because development wants to have a 2nd floor open. We should be prioritizing our transit riders and part of that is the blue line, instead of putting it in the basement. And with that, I cede my time.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mark Moore. Mr. Moore?
Hello, and thank you for letting me speak tonight. My name is Mark Moore. I'm a daily transit rider who works in Uptown. My primary comments were also somewhat about transfers, both for the Silver Line and for the CTC. My main concern with some of the CTC designs, again, is similarly about transfers between the Blue Line and other levels of service. As someone who transfers from the Blue Line to buses a lot already, it's already kind of difficult getting up and down between those 2 levels, and I fear that the underground version would make that harder with the current designs, where there didn't seem to be a very direct way to get between the underground concourse and the upper levels. Similarly, somewhat for the Silver Line, I am not opposed to the LPA, but my biggest concern is that there isn't really a good transfer between gold and silver on the southern side of the route. So effectively, you have it where people are either going to have to go all the way to Gateway and double back on gold, or they're all going to be trying to crush load onto the blue if we have people coming from Matthews and from southern part commuting towards offices in the other part of Charlotte that's mostly accessible by blue or gold. I'm a little bit concerned that could cause some issues there. And just for transferability between people who are coming from some of the poor parts of East Charlotte and needing to get into areas that would be connected by silver, just kind of not having that ability to transfer. I guess my other thoughts really were just for CTC in general. if it's going, especially if it's going to be underground, there needs to be more attention paid to enforcing rules and keeping it clean and maintained. You know, it's just, you know, even if a new space, if you don't do that, it's not going to be any better than what we currently have, to be honest. Other than that, just thank you, and I would like to just kind of emphasize that, you know, knowing some of the controversy that's been going around with the silver and everything, that we don't have to put all our eggs in one basket. Like, there are things we can do to advance the transit system, you know, with Envision My Ride, improvements with Central Avenue bus lane, even things like the Sprinter, potentially giving that more BRT-style service as its branding would imply, that could do some substantial benefits to the transit system as it currently stands without having to focus too much on the funding there. So thank you, and with that, I cede my time.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. To both of you, thank you for taking the time to be thoughtful about this, and thank you for giving us ideas that we will review. Mr. Cagle is going to be able to address some of these comments, and we have, I think, do we have the address and information or a way to contact our speakers?
Yes, ma'am.
So you'll get a reply from the staff in response to your questions, okay? Or comments. Thank you very much. Okay, now we're on our informational items. So for this section, we're going to have our first item, which is Connect Beyond, Advancing the Plan for a presentation. I just want to note, wait a minute, did I skip a budget process?
No.
Nope, we are going to do Advancing the Plan, so we're going to do that.
Beyond to Commissioner's business.
Okay.
You don't have to.
Would it be easier?
I believe so.
Okay, well, we're going to skip over Connect Beyond and move that to Commissioner's business so that we can have a discussion around that, because there's some goals that we want to be able to do, and we're going to have the president or the CEO of COG joining us on that as well, so that'll be great. So we'll go then to our next item, which is Envision Our Ride, and I see Mr. Lawrence is ready to talk about this. We're going to have an update on Envision Our Ride on the micro transit update. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's good to be in front of you all. Happy New Year for our first meeting of the year. Today, I'm going to give in a bit detail about our service change coming up for the policy. I'm going to have to ask you to drive. I can never get this right. My apologies. So let's go to the next slide. So today we, Envision My Ride, talk a little bit about, where we are and really in the context of microtransit, but I wanted to give you some highlights of our upcoming February service changes that Chrissy was able to detail a little bit about some information we shared at the TSEC meeting last month. And wanted to also circle back on the reliability improvements that we made in August and where we stand with some of the ridership, with how that looks on the change we made back in August 15, 2022, and then close us out with a really exciting thing that we're doing here at CAS is the implementation of microtransit, which was a key recommendation in the adopted Envision My Ride last year. Next slide. So from a service change summary, we're still working through ensuring that we have enough operators each and every day to ensure we have reliability, that we're not missing trips. So when we are looking at changes to make, we're being very cognizant of the impact to our operating side, ensuring that we are maintaining a certain level of operators each and every day. And so we are focusing on-time improvements that don't require us to add operators to the schedule. And so as we see here on the list here, that we have looked at some certain improvements for Nations Ford Road, Arrowwood, and these are improvements to improve the schedule and improve the timing of the route so that it arrives the time that we say it does on the schedule. So that's been a key strategy to improve those improvements, and we'll continue to do that throughout the rest of this year on-time improvements. Frequency improvements, I'll talk more about that when we get to the ridership discussion, but we were very happy to see some improvements on the operator side on the Lynx Blue Line, that we had enough capacity to add some frequency back into the peak. And so excited to bring back 15 minutes between 7 and 9 a.m. and 4 and 6 p.m. We're really seeing some improvements in the ridership during that time. We had some really minor route adjustments that we're also implementing next Monday on the West Boulevard and then the 290 Davison shuttle. I will go in a little bit of detail about the Route 10 adjustment on the next slide. So we've been working with Central Piedmont Community College across all their campuses to find ways to better access their facilities from the Harris campus here all the way over to the Levine campus and across the numerous campuses, the one in Huntersville as well. Talking to each of the directors of there, what are their needs, what kind of campus school courses they have, and how to better connect them in general. We saw a really good opportunity on the Harris campus here to extend the Route 10. Basically, the Route 10 ends in the Renaissance West community, and we saw an opportunity to basically just have a different turnaround going up Billy Graham, coming down to Morrisville, down to the CPCC campus. And so we're very excited to begin this in February, on Monday, to provide better access to our customers there. So, and this had no impact to the number of operators that we have each and every day. So this was a good service to put out there, and we still can maintain the schedule that we have with the Route 10. Next slide. So back in August of last year, we presented to you a strategy to improve reliability, but also wanted to note that throughout the course of last year, we made significant improvements into our CATS Pass app. If you recall, in the conversations we had with you all, there were some issues with being able to see real time on all of our buses and with the light rail. So over the course of last year, we improved our technology on our buses and our light rail vehicles so now that you can see real time and see real time arrival on all of our vehicles. And also, if we are in a situation where we have to cancel a trip, we can also show that and push that out to the app. And so that was another key strategy to improve reliability and the expectation of our services. We did that last year. In August, we came to you about modifying schedules to help reduce those missed trips, and we committed to continue the tracking of that reliability and how did those changes affect our ridership. And so we've continued to do that, and today I'll show some examples of what that analysis looks like on the next slide. So as I just mentioned, we took a very trip-by-trip approach, looking at the loads and the boardings for each of our bus routes to see where are we seeing capacity issues? Where could we potentially dial back service a bit, still maintain enough frequency to maintain the ridership, but where we could put those resources in routes that we were having issues with. And we prioritized the routes that had higher frequencies, like in the 10-minute, 15, and 20-minute here. And here's an example of how we use that analysis to determine where we would need extra trips. Like in the morning, if we saw the need early, like say between 6 or 9 a.m. on the Route 21, we know we needed to make sure we had enough frequency during that time of day to meet the ridership demand. Next slide. Here's an example of the Route 16. This is what we showed you back in August, showing that before we reduced the frequency, we were at 20 minutes throughout the day. We scaled this back to 30 minutes. What this is showing you, the kind of orange line there on the map going across is showing 20 average boardings per trip. So that's how many times somebody got on the bus from Rivergate all the way to Uptown Charlotte. So so it's not a load, it's how many people got on during that time. And the red line there are the 30 average boardings per trip. So you can see throughout the course of that long route, we had a couple of trips, we had more than 20 people getting on at any given time. And so we felt like that was reasonable, that we could pull back service somewhat to accommodate that ridership, but free up resources for other routes. Next slide. So after we reduce that frequency, we can continue to maintain this and look at this data, we're starting to see, we'd be expected to see some higher boardings on some of the trips because we expanded the frequency across. We are seeing some trips that were over 30 boardings, primarily in the middle of the day. Outbound, we're seeing a greater increase of that. But from a service standard standpoint, it still meets within our service guidelines, and we're going to keep looking at this and monitoring this. And this becomes an issue, then we will know where we need to strategically and tactically put the service back in. But at this point, we're going to maintain the frequency on this route and many others. Next slide. And I wanted to point out, before we made the changes in August, we had some real issues with, reliability of the service from a missed trip standpoint due to the lack of, operators being able to pull out each and every day. And you can see when August, when we made the change and down to September, our missed trips per week dropped drastically. And as we go throughout the year, we're seeing some really great improvements on that. So that is something really important for ridership. Frequency is important, but also reliability, and be able to expect and have that similar level of expectation throughout the day. Next slide.
Before you go,
yes,
Jason, we've got the picture of us instead of the September, October. Is there a?
I think we might be able just to move that.
Yeah, let's see if we can see.
Or reduce it maybe.
There we go.
There we go.
All right. So we can see the full.
So you can see the, stark decline in those, a small uptick in December, but holidays and that comes in the mix sometimes can add to, availability of operators with people taking time off for the holidays. So we're feeling good about, this improvement. We want to continue that reliability. Next slide. And so just to recap some of the changes that we made in that August change, these are the routes that we targeted for those changes. We're going to retain these changes until our operator availability improves, but we're going to keep looking at the ridership to bring back service. We're still tactically putting in trips throughout the day for times, like on the Route 9, where we see high levels of ridership, and we'll continue to do that and look at the ridership over time to make sure that we got enough service for the ridership that's out there. Next slide. We mentioned that there were a couple of changes we wanted to make with the express routes, primarily to the north because we had the most frequency there. So we did reduce those trips and we're going to retain those, but we are going to do a concentrated effort over the next couple of months to survey many of our express riders to really understand work patterns. We're seeing real changes in how people come to work. Tuesdays and Thursdays, we're seeing higher ridership on our express services in the Blue Line. We've heard particularly from some of our 77X riders that they might want to see a 3 o'clock trip instead of a 4 o'clock trip because people have that more flexible work schedule. So we're going to continue to look through that and maybe by the June change come back with some additional changes. I'll also point out that we did bring back 3 express routes that were suspended during the pandemic. We brought those back in November. The Steel Creek Express, the Arboretum Express, and the Mountain Island Express are now in operations, and we're watching those and seeing how that ridership is coming back with them being suspended for just over 2 years. Next slide. Just a couple examples of the Lynx Blue Line. I mentioned that we're seeing some strong patterns emerge on, from the coming out of the pandemic on ridership on the Lynx Blue Line. What this is looking at the loads and looking at what is our maximum load throughout any given day. And so we picked 150 it's 150 for load for a 2-car train set. And at the Carson station, northbound, so coming from the south, we're seeing by the time they get to Carson, the train is approaching about 150 on that train. In the southbound, we see that in the exit in the afternoon. And so we've been hearing a lot from our customers that it's getting crowded on the train. And so this is at 20-minute frequency. And so we felt like by adding trains during this time period, 7 to 9 in the morning, 4 to 6 in the afternoon, would help us relieve some of that pressure. And we're going to keep monitoring this and hopefully bring back additional frequency to Blue Line as our operator condition continues to improve. Next slide. So just to kind of summarize up the service reliability strategies, we're going to retain the adjustment to 20% of those routes that we changed back in August, and we'll be continuing to update you all as we monitor that ridership and our operator availability, increase the Blue Line to 15 minutes in the AM/PM peak, continue to look at that bus ridership. And I think another key strategy to improving frequency and reliability is the implementation of microtransit. Next slide, and I'll give some details of where we are with it. So back in May of last year, this body adopted the Envision My Ride effort. We've been working on that for a number of years, which led to an adoption by this group of high-frequency corridors, mobility hubs, and on-demand zones throughout the county. And we see that as a key strategy moving forward to add really another whole mode of transit service into the mix. And so key to that is understanding how we need to implement that within our community because it's different across the nation in each community that it's implemented in. Next slide. And so what is microtransit? I think we have talked about this for a bit, but just to kind of brief you again, it's about first last mile connections, bringing you from maybe a zone that's maybe in a more suburban area or more rural area or someplace that's not accessible by say a 40-foot bus and bringing you to a high frequency route. It's evolving and limited. It could be curb to curb. It could be curb to hub within, like say, a Blue Line station. You can also bring in ride-sharing groups. So some communities use Lyft and Uber as a part of the mix, or they have a complete turnkey on-demand fleet that operates as just like our buses do, but smaller, more nimble vehicles and applications, all within our CATS Pass app. So I want to stress that it'll all be completely coordinated with our app so you can pay, plan your trip, and then see when your ride is coming to you all through the CATS Pass app. Next slide. Couple examples here, Wilson, North Carolina, that gets touted a lot throughout the industry. It was one of the first around. But the only thing I like to point out here is they started out with 8 vehicles and now they're doing 22. So it's important to know that as these services come in line, they tend to become pretty popular and people want more frequency and want more flexibility. And so in a small town like Wilson has seen a more than doubling of their fleet as this service has really gotten kicked off. Next slide. Wilmington here, another state, another city within North Carolina, they have a private contractor called VIA that operates their service called Ride Metro, 4 zones throughout their community that connect to their fixed route services. In Wilson, is completely on demand. Here is a mix of more what we would think, on-demand zones connecting you to dedicated bus routes. Next slide. And then I think an example that we're probably more going towards is Dallas, Texas. They really are leading and doing a lot of conversion. They're expanding their microtransit program greatly. They use taxis. They're working with companies called Ryco, Lyfts, and Ubers, all coordinated with their app. And then we have a great relationship with DART. We're using essentially the same app that they are using. And so we're learning a lot of great examples from them. Next slide. So one thing we've talked about quite a bit is mobility hubs, and I know sometimes us in the planning space, we can just throw great names out and not tell you what it means, and then sometimes we show graphics like this to tell you this is what it is, and we show a bunch of like circles and all these different things that I think can be a little bit overwhelming, but I think mobility hubs are key to the strategy of microtransit. But if we break it down, like what is a mobility hub on the next slide, what it really is, we already have created mobility hubs within our communities. Our park and rides, our light rail stations, our bus stops are just some type of mobility hubs. And I think, pause if you go to the next slide, you can see an example that really just builds upon our existing stops and stations by incorporating all the other modes that are out there today, the ride-sharing economy, on-demand vehicles, technology to help people connect to services at our facilities. Next slide. And so when you think about, say, this is 25th Street Station, this will be one of our pilot locations for our first last mile pilot starting soon. So if we are using this as a mobility hub, what's missing in this space to really make it work well? It's already got bike racks, it's got ADA access, it's got pedestrian access up to the platform, it's got a light rail. So if you click slide one more time, what is the share space? How do we kind of demarcate where like a bus or a ride share vehicle so people know where to go, so people aren't parked there? How do we improve the signage so people know that we're there? How do we put kind of like things there that indicate the technology that's available for them to connect to public Wi-Fi? So those are things that we can do to improve those sites. Also, a good example is something that we've been working with Mecklenburg County Parks and Rec, and we're coordinating a greenway connection to our park and ride off of Gilead there at the Huntersville Gateway. If you recall, with the I-77 Express Lane project, a culvert was put underneath 77 to enable the Torrance Creek Greenway to come underneath there. But Mecklenburg County was having some issues of finding that kind of just that last little bit of connection. And so we coordinate with them to use space within our park and ride and work collectively together to help them make that connection. And as I understand it, they'll be getting construction soon on that. And so they're really excited to begin that. But this is another piece of a mobility hub. We are enabling this connection to connect to a large amount of like residential just on the other side of the interstate. So you could just walk, bike, or scoot to this location rather than drive to here. And if you've been in Huntersville, there's a lot of construction going around this about exit 23 and soon to be 21. So any way to avoid that would be beneficial. So just another example, kind of demystify what mobility hubs are. It's really just improving all those kinds of connections to make them more accessible to all users of mobility to our facilities. Next slide. So with that, just kind of to close out, as we look to our phase 1 pilot for microtransit working within our app, you all adopted 19 zones through our recommendation through Envision My Ride. 2 of those zones, we want to test a first last mile connection with ride sharing companies like Lyft and Uber from the Parkwood and 25th Street Station to the Camp North End area, and to employment opportunities when the University Research and Innovation Park areas from the J.W. Clay station. It'll all be coordinated within the app. It'll be supplemental to existing services. We're not replacing any services here. It would basically be like a transfer, like if you were transferring to a bus, so it would essentially be a transfer to those services. Initially, we're going to roll this out point to point, so not the full zone, but defined locations as we test the technology and test the trip planning functions. And we're targeting to start that by spring, summer of 2023. Next slide. And so the real rollout, the real kind of full implementation is how do we start converting our 60-minute routes to on-demand services? And we've talked about this briefly to you all before, but we've been having some conversations recently with town staff in Huntersville, Corningston, Davidson of charting how we do this to the village riders, the routes that serve basically from North Lake to Davidson Lake, all the three village riders that serve within that community, the 96, the 97, and the 98. And how to, and the Route 290 as well in this thing. So this will be, we see as an expansion of service, taking these routes, making sure we got the zones right, and then if we're able to, finding ways to pull that frequency that we use on the village riders and fold that back into the Route 77 corridor to improve frequency on our express routes. But this will be an ongoing conversation with the public. We're going to begin that with some public outreach. We hope by the end of February, early March to just begin the conversation. We'll have to do a service and fare equity analysis through this because this is a pretty big change. Because we don't have a microtransit fare. What would be the fare for this type of service? So we'll be bringing that to you all as those processes play out. We will be advertising a procurement for this as soon as we can get our documentation ready and work within our internal processes for a turnkey provider to be the contractor who could do our on-demand services throughout the system. And so that'll be a really important tool for us as we bring in another provider as we seek to implement this across the 19 zones within our system. And depending on the timing of all those activities, we look to an implementation late 23 or early 24, and we'll certainly keep you guys updated as we move through the process. And then just full implementation, I think I mentioned this here, full implementation would be all of those zones. We're seeking as many grant opportunities as we can to help with this. We applied for a SMART grant through the federal government to find ways to, the digital divide and the unbanked within our community. How do we, if we're expectation is that people have those devices and Wi-Fi and broadband to connect to these services, how do we ensure that that access is spread throughout? So we've applied through a grant to help us with some outreach and some technology upgrades at our stations. And so with that, I'm taking any questions.
That was a lot.
Sorry.
So I don't know
gonna be
how
a
to
big
break
year.
it up, but I expect that there might be some questions as it relates to how we're going to figure out, it says spring and summer of 2023. That's a lot of work to be done. And I guess one of the questions that, as we're going through this, what is going to be the marketing or the information that allows for the changes and people having the awareness that these things are going to be implemented? So is that being discussed now?
Absolutely. This will be clearly indicated on our website. We'll have signage for this. We'll have an education campaign. We have been working on this mostly on the back end just to get the technology right, to make sure our app will work, getting all the contracts lined up in place. And so the first implementation, as you mentioned, will be that spring, summer for the first last mile. Full implementation is later this year, early next year across the various zones in the county.
I hope that we'll use our committees to spread the word, our riders, and ways to advertise in a way that gets it really out there, because this is pretty cool to be able to do. So other questions for Jason? Commissioner Altman?
Thank you, Jason. Scrolling back to slide 11, the first half of your presentation, under bus service reliability. There you go. This is a tremendous improvement. I'm really happy to see it. One question of clarification. On the left-hand axis, it seems to suggest 1K, 2K, 3K. I don't think that means 1,000 misses, 2,000 misses, but what does that mean?
So so that's missed trips per week, so that's the summary for the month. So that's like, so if there's, January, there's 4 weeks in that month, so that would be over the course of a month. We provide close to 3,000 trips every single day. And so there's some context. We still are providing a lot more trips than we're missing each and every day. So that may seem like a big number, but each day we provide close to 3,000.
I see. So we're still missing about 1,000 trips a month?
So you're at the tail end of this graph here?
But now
So-
looking at December, well, last month, were we still missing about 1,000 trips a month?
So it varies from day to day. Usually weekends, we have higher missed trips than we do during the week. If you can, I can provide like the exact number from that. That might be more helpful too.
Thank you. And is the app updating when a bus is not coming? Because I know that was an important, at least to let people know not to stand around if something's canceled out.
Yeah, those were the reliability improvements that we rolled out in August, was to show that. So there'll be a line through the trip. If you scroll down the various trips, when you click on your bus stop, if a trip is not scheduled or if it's on time or it's delayed, all of that will be detailed in the app.
So you feel like the reliability of the update is good?
Yes, that's been
Okay.
very helpful.
Thank you, ma'am.
Other questions or comments?
I'll add
yes.
one real quick. I think one of the key things that we need to do, as has been alluded to, is making sure the communications are in order. So I would invite you to please use we all have PIOs in our little towns, communications managers or whatever, and that's just a great resource for them to reach, I think, into the grassroots.
I think that's a great comment. I think it was successful when we had to make some changes in the towns before. It was really very successful. So we should try to, when success happens, let's just mimic it. Okay. Anything else? Yes.
I have a question. Pineville, we laid down a lot of sidewalk along bus routes, and for 9 months, we've been trying to get the MTC to commit to putting pads in, and we've laid the sidewalk, so nothing is done. And we're talking about amenities and ADA improvements and everything else, but we talk about it, but when does it all happen?
Sure. I mean, I think it would be appropriate to come back and give you a more expansive update of our strategy to prioritize bus stop location improvements. And we have folded in the stop request from each of the jurisdictions to develop that list. And there has been some back and forth communication with town staff in Pineville, and I'll follow back up and see where we are with that. But I think a more substantive update about, coming out of the Envision My Ride, looking at the prioritization scores that we developed through that, but also our ADA improvements, because we have that score for all our system, to develop a way, how do we address, the 3,000 stops that we have, and making sure that we're putting those improvements, geographically, equitably throughout the system. So I think be happy to come back and give a larger update on that, Mayor Edwards.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments or follow-up that we need to make from this presentation? Okay, thank you very much. We're now going to go to the Link Silver Line update, and Andy Mock is going to present that for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great, thank you, Paulus. I guess we'll skip through like we did, Jason. Thank you. Tonight, I'm going to provide a status update of the Center City evaluation that's been ongoing for the last 8 or 10 months. Just as a note, we last brought an update for the Center City analysis in October of 22, so it's been a lot of conversation, a lot of public engagements going on since then. So tonight, we're going to give a little background for how we got here in this analysis. What was the public and stakeholder feedback that we received, and also an overview of the City Council endorsement that happened in January, and on our recommendation to the Metropolitan Transit Commission. Next slide. So as far as what brought us here, the locally preferred alternative along 11th Street has been out there since 2018 and 2019 when it was first adopted as part of Link System Update. And the main driving goal behind that alignment was really to get to Charlotte Gateway Station with a one-seat ride between the southeast and the west to serve economic development opportunities within Center City. One of the things with that design, it was assumed to be mostly at grade along 11th Street. And that was adopted at that time. That was the assumption at that time. When our team got into more of the engineering details in the 2020 for the design environmental services work, we started to identify some challenges with actually building it at grade along 11th Street. And that led to more of an elevated guideway with elevated stations. And that increased the cost and created some technical concerns. And one of the biggest concerns was about that connection between the blue and the silver. How can we make that as good as we can make it? We actually readopted the LPA along 11th Street 2 times with minor adjustments. One of them was to change the vertical nature of it, and one was just a minor adjustment in Center City, and that happened in 21 and 22. But there have been ongoing stakeholder and concerns and elected leadership concerns in Charlotte about that connection. That led to a ULI evaluation of that alignment in 2022, and they noted some opportunities to evaluate what's called interlining. That's running the light rail on the same tracks as either the blue line or the gold line. And so that's what we've really been looking at over the last couple of months is that a feasible, reasonable alternative to the locally preferred alternative. Next slide. So after a lot of talk, a lot of work, we've come down to 3 alternatives that we put out for public engagement. And I'll just briefly go over these. This map has been out there for a while. But of course, option number 1 is the adopted locally preferred alternative. That's the purple line that's on the top along the Brookshire Freeway. It's mostly elevated between Central Avenue and Charlotte Gateway Station. And so that's what was adopted previously in 2018, and then again 2 other times during our environmental work. And then we also came up with a shared blue line alternative, which follows a very similar alternative towards the 12th Street area and then merges into the blue line at that point and then stops at all the stations in Center City. One of the key distinctions with that alternative is that it doesn't provide for that 1-seat ride between the southeast and the west and requires a transfer. And then the other alternative was a shared gold line alternative, which comes along Independence Boulevard and then merges into the gold line near CPCC and runs along Trade Street. And it would require the reconstruction of Trade Street to create a dedicated guideway because we would want to bring it to a light rail standard. One of the other things that we came up with based on stakeholder feedback was a potential extension of the change in the terminus in Center City to the Moorhead Station. So that's shown in the red box. So those were the options that we put out to the public and to the stakeholders in the November timeframe. Next slide. So with that engagement, we did our normal full court press on our outreach with mailers and social media campaigns, and we also did a survey with a incentive, which really got us about over 1,100 survey participants. Really good feedback and more diverse feedback than we've received before from our participants. Next slide. So just as a note, some of those demographics. So we showed some of the changes from the previous surveys is a much higher percentage of the folks making total family income between 90 and 100,000. So that went up quite a bit, which is good. We also had a higher percentage of folks who are African American take the survey. Actually went up from 7% to 12%. So that we see that as a positive thing as well. And as well as the Latino went up almost 3 times much on the survey result. And I think a lot of that came down to a lot of more pop-up events where we would go to the CTC and other places where we would really get people where they are and actually ask them to take the survey, paper surveys, and those sort of things. Next slide. Regarding the specific engagement items, of course, we had the 2 live meetings on November 1st and 2nd. And the survey was open for that full month with the pop-up events. We then had a lot of outreach to some of our committees, including the Transit Service Advisory Committee, the Planning Commission, CTAG, Historic West End, Friends of Fourth Ward, and then the Uptown stakeholder listening sessions were November 29th and 30th, and those were important. Those were some of the private business developers and as well as institutions in Center City who have a stake in this. Next slide. As far as the survey responses, I'd say that the top 2 as far as most public support were the LPA and the shared gold line, and the least popular was the shared blue line. Some of the comments that people liked, and they're kind of a trade-off between the LPA and the shared gold line. What people liked about the LPA was that it was, took you to different places in Center City that aren't really currently served by transit. The trade-off is you miss Trade and Tryon with the direct connection, and it requires a transfer or a walk. The shared gold line takes you to a lot of those key destinations without a transfer, but what the public perceived as more concerns about the traffic disruption of being on Trade Street and the roadway reconstruction of Trade Street. The shared blue line was, basically people like that it takes you closer, all the places that the blue line takes you, but there is potential for traffic disruption, and it does require that transfer to get to CGS into the west. Next slide. From the stakeholder engagement, what we heard is that there was the concerns we heard about changing from the adopted LPA was what those impacts might be to the Charlotte Gateway Station construction and the Amtrak station, as well as impacts to current and future development opportunities. One of the reasons why the LPA was selected is because there's a lot of vacant and underutilized property along the LPA. And so there were some concerns about losing or changing how that development form might occur in the future. If we were on shared gold line, there was concerns from Central Piedmont Community College about what that might mean for pedestrian, student, and access across Trade Street and how people actually get to campus. A lot of concern about that, and how that character would change of Trade Street if it went from more of a streetcar service to a dedicated guideway with the Silver Line. So there was some concerns about how that might work. But one thing we did hear is that from a lot of our stakeholders is that ridership is a very important variable, and we agree with that. And that's something that we should really take carefully into our consideration. Next slide. Some of the considerations with the LPA and some of the things we've heard through our outreach and through our council process is that it is the most reliable option at a higher cost. So there is a higher cost associated with that bridge that you see in the picture, but what that gives you is a more reliable service. One of the things that we heard through the public process and through some of the committee processes is that concerns about how would the shared gold line work, and how will the Silver Line not get held up by a car on the tracks, or the gold line being delayed or something like that. So I think that benefit of that bridge and that opportunity that additional cost gives you provides a lot of benefit. It also gives you an integrated station at Charlotte Gateway Station. So it gives you a Silver Line station direct at the same level as the Amtrak station. It also provides access to development opportunities on the north and west sides of town that aren't currently served by transit. And there's a lot of this is here in 4th Ward at Graham Street. And so there's also a lot of Center City stakeholder buy-in. So there was a lot of buy-in on the LPA as it was. Regarding the ridership evaluation, in our modeling in the future years, we don't really see any distinguishing difference between the options because of that future growth through Center City and that being dispersed amongst either of the alternatives. Next slide. Regarding the Moorhead Terminus option, it was one of the most highly supported key destinations in our survey, so there's a lot of public support for it, a lot of stakeholder support for it, so we think it could be a good alternative, and also does provide some good direct service to development opportunities, as well as access to Bank of America Stadium, so that's definitely a benefit. But there is an added cost of $400 to $500 million of adding this into Phase A, primarily because of the bridge going over NS, so it's relatively expensive extension. Next slide. So relating to the council and MTC engagements, just kind of quickly walk through this. We last were at the MTC in October, then we went through a pretty robust committee and council engagement through the month of November into December and then ultimately into January. Went to the town of Matthews on January 9th for a presentation to the board, as well as tonight to the MTC for information. Next slide. So regarding the city council endorsement, on January 3rd, the Charlotte City Council Transportation Planning and Development Committee voted unanimously to recommend the full council endorsement of the locally preferred alternative following 11th Street, and that was endorsed by full city council that night on January 3rd. Next slide. So therefore, regarding our MTC information item tonight, we're not recommending a change in the locally preferred alternative. So the outcome of our evaluation is really no change to locally preferred alternative, and therefore no action, just an information update, providing a summary of where we've been. But however it relates to Center City Terminus, we do want to continue to evaluate that alternative because it was so popular and we think there's a lot of benefit there. So I think we would like to continue to evaluate and then come back to the MTC at a future time, in which time we feel like it's ready to make that recommendation.
Okay.
With that, I'll take any questions.
Questions? Mayor Higdon?
Yes, Andy, I told you after you spoke in the town of Matthews that I'd probably have some questions later, so I've got them now.
Okay.
Just really one question. This being the higher cost alternative and additional cost possibly with changing the terminus, Is this going to adversely affect the build-out of other sections of it through value engineering? Since this is so costly, are other sections going to be kind of shortchanged? I'm specifically talking about Matthews, of course, but anywhere along the line.
I mean, we will have to go through a federal process, and that process will include value engineering. I'll say that one thing is that the cost is the cost. The LPA cost isn't really changed, right? So that cost is what we had adopted, and it's the same. There will be a process, and we'll have to evaluate cost. Cost is always a consideration. I say right now, we don't see our financial models don't project that at this point. But cost effectiveness is an important thing that we're going to have to balance as we go forward. So, we don't have a crystal ball, but we see this as a reasonable alternative at this point, given the previous adoption.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure if that was a yes. And I think it is the process of the value engineering that we'll have to go with the feds, and that's going to be for every part of what we do. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully.
My concern is I just don't want to put, the overwhelming majority of our funding into the Charlotte section and leave none for the other folks, so.
Well, it's not going to work if it's just for Charlotte, because there are a lot more people coming to Matthews than going on north. So we're going to try to work them, make sure that happens. Any other questions? Okay, yes, Commissioner Altman?
Thank you. I just want to publicly thank CAT staff that were so generous with their time and taking me to look. I wanted to see some of this in person. And I just want to say publicly how impressed I was with the planning and the vision. If we're going to do this, we need to do it right. And I really believe, I see in my Twitter feed like every day where there are delays because the car is not where it's supposed to be and it's holding up the gold line or, what have you. And, we don't want to, we want to have something that's really reliable. And I really like the vision, and I, feel like where it's going to be, it's planned to intersect through the LPA at 11th Street is going to be a beautiful area that we're going to be able to activate and bring great amenities to our residents and, just bring a whole new infusion of vitality. And of course, its connectivity to the Charlotte Gateway Station is key, and it also going to be just amazing for our residents. So thank you for the tour and taking the time, and thank you for all the hard work. I think it's an incredible vision and plan.
Well, on that one, I think we can say thank you. We have one more informational item to go through before we go to our 2 action items. So we're going to ask Mr. Howell to come up and present the preliminary budget update and process that you're going to explain to us.
Good evening, Chairwoman Lyles and Commission members. My name is Chad Howell. I am the interim CFO for CATS. I've been with the city, a little bit of background about me. I've been with the city about 20 years. The last 10 or so I've been with Charlotte Water, serving as their CFO. And for the last 60 days, I've been in CATS learning more about this organization, because this is my second tour here. I was here a few years back in a much different role. And I'm very pleased with the help that I've gotten from many people sitting here to my right in putting this budget together. So tonight, I'm presenting a preliminary budget that is balanced and addresses the CEO's focus areas. However, it remains a work in progress, and some of the numbers and associated items may change before we're back to present this to you later in the year. Next slide, please. Those CEO focus areas, and we've already started some of these in 23. Apologize if my voice breaks a little bit. I've been fighting a cold. We've started these in 23. Are, of course, a balanced budget, maintain good, sound physical management, safety and security, valuing employees, and maintenance of our maintenance and asset preservation. Next slide, please. There we as I always like to do, and I think this was traditionally the way it's been done here, I'll start with the revenues and work into expenses. Our preliminary revenues and operating budget that you'll see in a second is about 6.5% higher than the budget, the adopted budget for '23. The revenue increases predominantly come from our sales tax, some additional federal grant monies that are coming in, as well as some passenger fare increases. Specifically on the next couple of slides, we're going to look at the sales tax and some ridership trends that support those numbers. Next slide, please. After working with the city economist, we project an increased revenue in FY23 and FY24. In '23, we're projecting right now to close the year out approximately $13 million ahead of where we were budgeted. As anyone that has been in the community, as y'all are in your roles, but also as residents, the community is growing very quickly. And so we're seeing that here with the sales tax. Moving into FY24, we are projecting an increase of about $11 million over FY23, but we are wanting to remain conservative at this point in case there is a possibility of a slowdown in the local economy. And again, I've worked with, this is through talking where we are right now with the city's economist. Next slide, please. And you saw this alluded to in some of the other previous presentations, but we are seeing an increase in ridership. In FY24, we are projecting slight increases in ridership with bus ridership recovering to 57% of pre-pandemic levels and rail ridership recovering to approximately 78% of pre-pandemic levels. The reason the rail ridership is up a little more than the bus ridership is we are also adding the goal line in here. So we're seeing some benefits from there as well. And we think right now, based on projections, that this could result, as we showed in an earlier slide, about $3 million more in revenues for 2024.
Hey, Chad, before you move off this slide, I just wanted to correct something and make sure that we're level setting. When Mr. Howell mentioned increased passenger fare revenues, he means increased revenues, not increasing fares. So I wanted to be clear that we all were understanding exactly what that meant. We are not basing any new revenue projections on increasing individual fares. It would be increases in fare revenue in total.
Yes, sir, thank you. There is no projected fare increase in 2024. Next slide, yes. So as with the revenues, we're also seeing about a 6.5% increase on the operating side. Of course, the numbers balance. Primarily, we're again looking at the CEO's focus areas of valuing employees. We've begun to address some initiatives in '23 that you will continue to see into ’24. In FY24, we're hoping to complete a class and comp study. And that would take us into 2025. So you would still see a focus on those areas through 2025. In safety and security, built into this budget is about a $3.5 million increase in our security contract. So that's for the uniformed folks that you see on platforms. And working with our safety director, we're looking to increase that about $3.5 million in '24, and an additional $3.5 million in '25, give or take between the 2 years. So over the 2 years, the contract will cost us approximately $7 million more than the current contract. For preventive maintenance, I would say that is a heavy focus this year. And since I've got here, I have met extensively with the CATS division managers, and one thing I heard is we need to work on and maintain and repair what we have. So within this year's budget, as it currently stands, there's $45 million budgeted for rail, bus, ST, and STS preventive maintenance, and that's between those three areas. A couple other quick areas to touch on, and we're already here with the fuel slide. Fuel expenses are going up this year about $7 million. or about 95 cents per gallon above where we were budgeted for '23. And again, that's for many reasons, and that folks who follow the news can relate to, but that's our current estimate. So operationalizing that 95 cent across the number of gallons is about $7 million more above '23. Next slide, please. One other thing I also like to look at is the CPI. And what you'll see here is over the last year, so the year ending '22, CPI increased approximately 7% for the year. So what does that mean to us? It means any and everything commodity or service that we buy costs more, and we can buy less of it for the same amount of money that we bought a year ago. And so built into that increase from '23 to '24 is also a good amount of these type of increases. Next slide, please. For debt service for '24, we're about $18.1 million. We have no new debt issuance programmed into '24. However, I would like to point out to the committee or to the commission that I am working with City Finance to look at future debt issuances that we may want to bring back to the MTC to discuss. And those would be for things like bus purchases. We will touch on that in a minute with the CIP and items like that, that we could, if the market is such that we can issue some debt to do that. But we'd be coming back in front of this group for that. Next slide, please. Capital investment plan. All right. So in 2024, and I would say let's focus on 2024 for now, we've got the highlights here. I've mentioned 37 bus replacements. That's up from the original 17 that we thought we would purchase in 24. So when we presented the budget a year ago, we thought the number would be 17. We now know that it needs to be 37 to continue to make sure that the fleet is turned over in a timely manner. 19 replacement STS vehicles. That's up from 13. So we feel like that there needs to be 6 additional replacements next year for that. And while I'm talking about 24 at this point, we would expect that we would also need to see similar numbers for 25, 26, 27, and 28. That's not necessarily represented here because this is a work in progress, and we're still working to get those numbers together. But again, these are increased turnover in the fleet to bring it back up to the average age that is kind of the industry standard. The total 5-year CIP is about $207 million. Next slide, please. How are we going to fund that? So how are we going to fund those additional buses? Well, what I'm proposing for 24 at this point is that we use some reserve funds that we have. We are above the minimums that are required by the MTC for our reserves. And I think utilizing about 27 million of that to upfront and continue some of those bus purchases is a good way to use that. That will not put us in any stress of coming close to the minimums that are required by policy. And again, that is buying us time to look at 27 through 28, possibly 29, working with City Finance to come up with a plan to continue this increased number of purchases. Next slide, please. So I included this slide, and I won't read through every one because I said, please be gracious. This is a work in progress. So here are the items that we're still working through, and we'll be bringing back at another time as desired by the MTC. We'll be coming back to you and talking through these. Ultimately on track. Next slide, please. To come back to the first, we'll Transit Advisory Committee on April 18th, the preliminary date, and then ultimately back to the Transit Commission for approval on April 26th before it goes to City Council. And we'll make supplemental presentations to the Commission as needed to ensure that we're ready for that adoption in April. Chairwoman Lyles, I stand ready for any questions that you or the commissioners may have.
So we have Bill Thunberg, who is watching virtually, has raised his hand. You're recognized, Mr. Thunberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to compliment you on the fact that you've put so much emphasis on maintenance and safety in the operating budget. And I think those are critical issues, and they are part of the strength of CATS, the ability to focus on these maintenance issues and not put those off, because it's, with a lot of agencies, it's just easy to put that off for financial reasons, and I appreciate your emphasis on that. I've got a couple of things that I want to throw out there I don't need answers to today. One is that are there any refits that could be advanced or rebuilds that could be advanced that would be helpful in the budget? And I don't know whether those would show up in the operating budget or in the CIP. And two is are there any maintenance facility improvements as a part of that CIP, particularly for battery vehicles, and or is there a contract for off-site servicing of battery vehicles? So, well, in your next presentation, I'd like to hear those answers. Thank you.
Yes, so Chad, I think we can answer these pretty quickly now, and happy to include them in the next presentation with more detail. So to your first question about refits and rebuilds, one thing that is in the current year's budget, so you don't see it here, is we do have about $50 million for what my operations folks call the midlife rebuild or rehabilitation of the first tranche of Blue Line cars that the city purchased 15 years ago. So they're at their midlife. So that will be significant efforts to do complete rebuild of that first tranche of cars. That effort is starting now, so it's in the current budget and will take, I'm going to say, 3 to 5 years to complete. 6 or so years, we'll see. So a little bit of this rebuild is very substantial. It's literally taking the cars apart and rebuilding them. So it's a little bit hard to tell exactly how long, but it is substantial. The point of that is in future budgets, maybe not next year, but you will see the second tranche of cars, they will reach their 15-year mark and they will need to be rebuilt. So we will be in this cycle periodically. On the buses, on the rebuilds, we have a significant number of buses that just need to be replaced. And so we are going to aggressively do that in the current year and in years forward. What I would say on bus replacements is the numbers that Chad presented today may actually go down next time we present, because as to the extent possible, we're going to try to buy as many buses this year to get ahead of that rather than have to wait to next year. It is a priority. On our facilities specific to electric vehicles, we are pursuing grants. We've received grants and pursuing grants, and we will continue doing that, because the short answer of facilities for electric vehicles is yes, we will have significant facility needs and infrastructure needs around supporting electric vehicles. We are currently working with a consultant to identify those infrastructure needs. And once those needs are identified, the budget needs will come out, but they will be significant.
And how many, just a reminder, how many electric buses did we have from our grant from the federal government?
Yes, so we currently have all 18 of the original battery electric buses are in the fleet. I believe the last 2 are to be delivered or were just delivered, but we basically have completed the 18 bus purchase that we have from the original grant.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Thunberg. So I want to recognize do we have someone here? Okay, we're going to recognize Ms. Oshler.
I had sort of two questions. One, are of the replacement buses that are budgeted, are any of those electric? And I ask because part of the premise of putting CTC in the underground option was that, you know, in the future, when that's built, most of the fleet would be electric. But if we're buying non-electric buses now and they last, you know, a long time, that's what I'm asking. And then I'll ask the second question.
So I'll field that one as well. We are committed to battery electric buses. That is an absolute. Will all of the next purchase be electric? Probably not. They will be a mix of electric and hybrids. So they will represent a significant improvement towards our CAP goals than the buses we have, because remember, the buses we currently have that will be replaced are the oldest and they're pure diesel buses. So they will be an improvement, but no, they will likely not be entirely electric. I think that before we're able to go full purchases electric, we need to better understand, we need to make sure we have all of the charging infrastructure in place to support it. So we will continue making improvements, but I would fully expect that this year and possibly next year's bus purchase will be a mix of hybrid and electrics.
Thank you. And my second question, and it may be more granular than what would normally go in this presentation, but one of the reasons that TSAC and CTAG would like to meet, you know, a lot of people have brought up that there's not sufficient bus stop amenities. You know, Mayor Edwards mentioned, like, there's sidewalks, but then there's no benches or shelters. And some of the questions we've asked in the past is, I know that CATS has put a lot of time into making sure that bus stop amenities are fairly, you know, where they put them is based on a fair methodology, and that's wonderful. But then when we would like to know essentially, like, what's the budget for building benches and shelters, and how much of it was spent? Is that budget going to go up year to year? Like, you know, putting the money where the the methodology is for placing it. Like, are they getting built? Are we increasing the budget for building them? That's something that I think we'd like to talk about, because our two committees, that's of interest to us, and we'd love to be able to see that in the budget.
We can definitely come back with that. So you want to see what was budgeted and what was spent?
Yeah, because we'd like to know if more will be budgeted and did it get spent. I mean, we hear a lot of times why facilities can't be built because there's no sidewalk or a million reasons. But surely there are places where they can be built, and we'd like to see, okay, how much has been spent building more shelters and benches and things like that, and are we going to spend more year to year?
Yes, ma'am, we can do that.
Thank you.
All right. Mayor Washam?
I want to follow up on that, and then I've got a couple more comments, but the scenario that you just described is critically important in North Mecklenburg. We've been begging for better amenities for years and years, and we've gotten a few, but it's not nearly. I bet Brent rides by a lot of those on his way to work. Sometimes we got to do a lot better if we want to increase our ridership up in the North Mecklenburg region. We're a little different up there. We're a little more rural, and we're not rural, but we're spread out a little bit more at the moment. We've got to fix that, because it's just never been right for us. The other thing, as it relates to the budget itself, I think there's two factors that I'll want to know as we work through it, not necessarily tonight, but how are you incorporating, you know, inflationary factors in there, interest rate risk and things like that, which are critically important. I mean, we've all experienced and watched DOT go through some bad projections, if you will, from time to time, and I think we're a little bit vulnerable as it relates to those factors. So I think that we need to understand that you've got it right. And I assume you're leaning on the resources of some economic projections within the city, and that's great. But I just think we need to feel really good that we've done as good as we can on those two items.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Other comments? Ms. Altman?
Thank you. Ms. Exlin, I really appreciate, you asked my question about electric buses, and I appreciate Mr. Cagle's answer. That is important, and I really appreciate your second point as well. And it's so important, and it seems like something of a stubborn issue, that maybe it would be a good idea to consider putting it on an agenda, a future agenda, for us to really see how the decision's been made in the past with the allocation of resources, and how is it going to increase over time, because it just seems like none of us have, a lot of us would like to understand that better because we get feedback from our residents. My questions would be, just in sort of rapid fire so we can get through them quickly, but if we do go into a recession and we have reduced sales tax, are you projecting for any of that in terms of your planning?
The way we're tackling it right now, so there is also still the trend line, so we're holding back. We're not budgeting, to spend every cent that comes in. We're still keeping the trend line there, and there is a difference between the two. So that's one. We're trying to be conservative about what we're budgeting in total based on the feedback that we've gotten from the city economist. Short of that, on the expense side, just looking back, there's always some. We can't fill every single position the minute that it becomes vacant. So there's a certain amount of built-in attrition there for budget. So we would definitely look there at what might already be there as we look to build up to fully staffed. And then if it comes to it, and I've been through these before, if we're really going to take a hit that is beyond what we feel like we could recover from with other revenues, we would look at a reduction exercise, and we would work very openly with that.
Okay. What is the, looking at the employment expenses, what is the minimum wage for a CATS employee?
So, Ms. Allman, the minimum wage for any city employee is $20 an hour. That was just implemented by the city manager in the current year's budget, and that applies to all CATS employees. If you'd like more wage information particular to CATS, we can pull that together.
No, if that's, I was wanting to know what the floor was. And then my last question, looking at the projected expenses for the CIP, I must not be looking in the right spot. Would the contribution or expenses for the CTC rebuild be reflected here, or would it not be?
When you see continues prior year initiatives, that's anything that's already in there. That money was already programmed in a prior year. So anything that was already programmed is also, it would be on top of what's here. These are just new dollars.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Let me try to clarify that. The CTC, there is an action item tonight on that, but we are basically at the beginning stages of design. So yes, there will be CTC design money, but we would need better information before we would ever be able to put that for construction into the budget. And so you would expect to see that, assuming that the CTC continues moving forward, you would expect to see that in future years.
Thank you.
Yes, Mayor Higdon?
Yeah, one more comment with regards to the bus stops. Previously, and I don't remember exactly when, but we spoke about possibly having town staff assist to accelerate this effort, maybe as a partnership, so don't expect an answer tonight, but maybe we can revisit that as well. I know in Matthews, we're certainly willing to do that if it means we can get shelters built more quickly.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Tillman?
In regards to the $3.5 million increase to the security contract for the next coming years as it's been laid out, is that in physical personnel or is that in technology? What's behind the, I would say, significant increase in that based upon conversations last year and previous that all incidents that we were having was somewhat overblown? There was sort of a tempest in a teapot. There wasn't that many of them. So why such a significant increase in 2 consecutive years for security?
I'll give you the short answer, and then we can obviously come back with a longer, more detailed answer. It's predominantly in additions to staffing, as far as the uniformed folks that you see on the platforms, trains, and that. So that is a piece of it. Those would be the 2 different We have both folks that carry sidearms and folks that do not, and so it would be on both sides of that. And that is coming from we just concluded, or in the process of concluding a procurement process for those 2 new contracts. So part of it is we are ramping up and adding some additional staff. I believe there is a technology piece to it, but I think predominantly it's the staffing, and it costs more now to do anything than it did the last time we were there. So even if we stayed the same number of staff, it would be more expensive. So that's kind of the 50,000-foot level, but I know you're wanting more information than that, and we can definitely come back with some.
Sure, I
One thing I
appreciate
will
that.
say, Mr. Tillman, one thing I will say for this contract, it's time for the RFP to go out to get a new contract. There is an expansion of staff, but equally as impactful on this cost increase is this service is it's just much more expensive in today's environment. The security agencies have a very difficult time paying what they used to pay. And so there are significant inflationary increases associated with the service just fundamentally in today's environment.
Absolutely. And I think back to some of the incidents where we had, I would say, responses from our riders saying that seemed like there was becoming a little bit of a police force, a lot more aggressiveness, a lot more just intimidation in some respects, and making it uncomfortable. So when we talk about adding staff, that's where my concern starts to go.
Yeah, and I will also want to clarify, this is, so in addition to staff, right, those staff are not there to be on every bus type of thing, right? This is not where buses, we try to have armed security or even unarmed security. They're there for support. In addition to safety and security, honestly, we're looking at training, right? The best way to keep our drivers safe is to keep them out of confrontations, and so de-escalation training. And so there are many different approaches to it, but there is an element of increased staffing and then the inflationary increase. But I think that I think safety and security it has to be first. Our drivers and passengers. They deserve to have a safe working environment and a safe transit experience. And we'd be happy to provide more detail on this particular item because it is so important and such a big part of our operating budget at our next meeting, if you'd like.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Are there any other comments? Mayor Lyles has stepped out. Comments or questions? Okay, hearing
Thank
seeing
you.
none, we'll move on. Thank you. Let's move on to our action items. Link Silver Line, Bojangles alignment. Mr. Mott.
Thank you, Mayor Higdon. There we go. Thank you. This presentation is a relatively minor alignment change, but it does have some potential impacts. So we wanted to go through this and go through the formal process with it. Next slide. So we really want to kind of go over the Bojangles alignment refinements. When I say Bojangles, we're talking about Bojangles Arena, Ovens Auditorium, along Independence. So people have an orientation there. Go through the public engagement overview, as well as our scorecard, and the Bojangles action item that we're proposing. Next slide. So the lines that you see in front of you represent, the purple line represents the adopted LPA as currently adopted as of January of 22. One thing to note about that, and you'll see like the yellow line looks relatively the same from a map view perspective, but to actually build that purple line, it really requires a closure of Television Place. So when we started to get into the engineering details of it, we weren't able to keep that street network whole. And with that comes cascading impacts and concerns. And some of those concerns were about how that disconnecting that street network would have flow down impacts to Independence Boulevard or Monroe Road, or defraying traffic into neighborhoods, especially for special events. Folks who have been to a Checkers game or something knows how it can be. So once we started understanding the details of it, we identified another alternative that could keep the street network whole and the same to minimize those concerns. And that's the dashed yellow line, which is what our Bojangles proposed refinement. From a station perspective, relatively the same. And the key distinctions there between those two lines are about the ability, the yellow line is able to keep the street network the same, but requires a taller bridge that goes over Briar Creek Road and Independence Boulevard. So it's a little higher bridge, but it allows us to keep the street network the same and it alleviates a lot of concerns from traffic. So that's the kind of high level difference. Next slide. And this shows kind of a visualization of the station as it relates to the proximity to ovens and Bojangles. So a really high level of service for special events. It also shows a special event parking garage. It would be used to replace parking that's lost with the construction. So there's a lot of that goes into making this alignment work and keep all those special event venues open for revenue service during construction. So that was a challenge in itself. So this just kind of shows how we're configuring the station as it relates to the special event venues. Next slide. To remind folks how we go through our benefits and risk framework, this is our decision-making framework that ties to the purpose and need. So we're trying to maximize or minimize the travel time, improve the local connectivity, and improve development opportunities while minimizing risks, environmental consideration, and coordination, all undergirded by public engagement. Next slide. So from a scorecard perspective, and the scorecard is the tool we use to weigh these options. We've been doing that for a couple years now. From the LPA perspective, from local connectivity, the pedestrian, it requires pedestrians to cross the street to get between, say, Ovens, Bojangles, to this new street that we would have to build to the station. So there's a little better service and some safety concerns with how that might work. While the proposed refinement alleviates that, keeps the street network the same, and doesn't require that pedestrian crossing of the street. It also provides better bus and special event circulation. From a development perspective, changing the street network has a lot of challenge. It creates a lot of challenges for redevelopment of the site as well as Park Expo, while the refinement alleviates all those by keeping the street network the same. From an environmental considerations perspective, on the LPA does have a lower bridge over Independence Boulevard, but does, as I noted before, create some concerns from a traffic perspective. From the refinements, has a higher bridge, so they'll be more concerned about visual and noise concerns with a higher bridge. It's also a little closer to a different neighborhood. As far as coordination goes, keeping the street network makes coordination with NCDOT and others much simpler and much more straightforward. So that has a clear winner there. Next slide. From a public engagement perspective, we did have a lot of focused community and stakeholder meetings for the folks in the area. Charlotte East, Echo Hills, which is the neighborhood next to Fugate, right next door, Commonwealth Park, and the CRVA, who are the operators of the Bojangles and the Ovens Auditorium. From a survey response perspective, really strong support from a survey. 73% of all survey respondents either supported or strongly supported it, and only a relatively small amount were in opposition. Next slide. So with that, our recommendation to the MTC is to refine the LPA alignment, to shift the alignment to the east side of Briar Creek and Television Place to alleviate some of those concerns that we raised earlier. And then we would then adopt this into our alignment and update our engineering details to show that. Next slide.
All right. Thank you very much, Andy. So are there any questions on the alignment? Mayor Knox?
Yes, Andy, go back to the slide showing the overview with the purple line and the dotted line. Okay, there you go.
There you go.
All right, so if I turn in on Briar Creek and I'm going to go into the existing parking behind Bojangles, am I going to have to cross over the new track?
Yes.
If you will?
So I mean, I think the idea is that this surface parking lot that you see out there will no longer be there.
Okay.
And it'll be a completely reconfigured area, because really to get the Silver Line in any situation, we have to rebuild that entire parking lot. It really doesn't meet any standard today. So what you see out there will be a completely different environment than you see today, but you will have to cross. But there will be a station with pedestrian crossings on either side of the station, facilitating a safe crossing of the track.
Mayor Higdon?
Yes, what are the particular impacts up there on the northwest corner of Shenandoah Avenue? Is the neighbors are in favor of the LPA there?
Well, so we've had a number of conversations with some of these communities, Commonwealth Park and others. There certainly are concerns, private property concerns, direct private property concerns are always going to be any change in the alignment is going to induce some of that. Some of those folks who are probably opposing it were the folks who may have a private property concern. From a broader perspective, we didn't hear anything that was overwhelming that would create or induce a change or a concern with this adjustment. But certainly with a new alignment, there will be new private property concern and there'll be new transactions that's required, and there's new opportunity for people to be displeased with that choice.
Is that going to be really disruptive to the tree save area there?
There will have to be removal of those trees. I don't know if they're actually tree save or not, but there certainly those trees will have to be removed. There's also a lot of utilities in that area as well that would have to be redone.
All right. Mayor Bales?
Is there a cost, an estimated cost differential between the two?
There is. So the change in the alignment creates what we estimate to be somewhere around $8 million of increased cost because of the height of the bridge. It's a much more complicated bridge. That's defrayed a little bit because we have to relocate a lot less road construction. But we think that at the bottom line number, somewhere about $8 million difference between the two. But there's also that benefit of not creating challenges to the community as far as that traffic and actually getting this through the traffic analysis with the state. There's also some benefit there as well. But yes, there is a cost difference.
Anything else, Mayor Bales?
No.
Commissioner Altman?
Thank you. So 73% supported and 22% were neutral. So that's a net of 95% of the folks surveyed in the neighborhood were in favor of the proposed refinement?
This is everyone who took the survey on the entire Silver Line length. So we didn't distinguish between in the community or along the 26 miles.
Of course, but they were, I'm sorry, that was my mistake, but they were in favor of the proposed refinement?
Correct.
Okay, not the LPA. Okay.
That's correct.
And remind me why the proposed refinement is less damaging to the neighbors living at the top of this image than the LPA?
Well, I think that the impact is different depending on where you are. If you're on the LPA, if we choose the LPA, then the impact is defraying traffic to these communities down here and less here. But if we're choosing here, there's a smaller impact on specific properties here, and there's concern from visual of a taller bridge in this area, certainly. But you've mitigated some of the concern here. So from a community neighborhood impact, it's kind of a trade-off between these two specific areas.
Thank you.
Mayor Bales?
How many properties do you estimate are going to be impacted to the north or, well?
Right here?
Yes.
At least one, maybe more. It's a relatively large, this is an NCDOT, some NCDOT right away here. There's a home here, so at least one, maybe up to 3 or 4.
And the height of the bridge itself?
It's going to be about 30 feet above existing Briar Creek Road. So it will be a third level bridge. If Independence is here, Briar Creek is here, it will be a level above that.
Compared to the Eastway Bridge.
I wanted to say that we've got more questions, so yes, the Eastway Bridge.
Yeah, just go right down the street compared to the Eastway Bridge. Is it roughly the same height as Eastway going over Independence, or is it substantially higher than?
It would be so Independence, Eastway, it would be the same sort of configuration. It would be a third-level bridge above Eastway or Briar Creek in either situation.
I can't remember who the council member was that is in this district, but if I recall, and Andy, there was a discussion among the neighborhoods and their associations, if I recall, and the preferred was from a neighborhood association, if I recall correctly. Is that, am I?
I mean, we presented this to several neighborhoods. Charlotte East was a good one. It's kind of a coalition of many. I don't know that I don't know if there was a vote or a preference, but there certainly was, there was an objection beyond the specific property concerns that were noted.
All right, Commissioner Altman?
Why do you think such a large preponderance of residents wanted the Bojangles proposed refinement, though it is $8 million more? What's your sense of that?
I think a lot of people like the idea of not crossing a street on a special event to get directly from the station to the special event generators. So I think a lot of people see that image of that rendering of the station right outside of Bojangles and can imagine themselves going to a hockey game or taking their kids to a concert or whatever and see that benefit of that pedestrian access. So we heard a lot of good things about that idea of having the station right outside the special event venues.
Any other questions? So I know that Ed Driggs is watching this meeting, and I know that he did not sign up for a conversation, but I think that when the Transportation Committee looked at this, it was fully supported unanimously in their review. That was a deeper dive than perhaps some of the things that I don't recall. So
yeah, we presented this in October as well before the public meeting to the Transportation Committee.
okay, so this is an action item. If there are no further questions, is there a motion to approve the Link Silver Line Bojangles alignment as a change, refinement?
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor, please raise your hands. Anyone opposed? I think our voting members it was unanimous. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
We have another project to come up. It's been, between August and January, they've been working a lot. So we're going to now look at the CTC redevelopment and the LPA recommendation. Again, this was reviewed, I believe, in January the 3rd, from our Transportation Planning and Development Committee of the City Council voted to support it, and the member that was not there was not present, so it wasn't, and the vote was 4-0 to adopt the recommendation. So now it comes to us for review. All right.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Lawrence.
So you all have seen this in various iterations over the past 6 months or so, so I will go through this fairly quickly tonight to get to our staff recommendation. But Paul, if you go to the next slide, I do want to, kind of bring this all in summary and to a close as we have an action item for you tonight to talk about what brought us to this moment, talk about that design process for the Charlotte Transportation Center. We did do a extensive public outreach in October of last year, and we have our staff recommendation and next steps we'll present to you tonight. Next slide. I think we all know the project and the location of where this is, but this is a really great image to see how all this kind of comes together in uptown Charlotte and the intersection of our gold and blue lines. And as we've seen, this area has changed greatly over the past years that this project has been there. It was opened in 1995, so imagine what this angle would have looked like in 1995, very different. So a lot of investment we've put here, and we see this as an opportunity to capitalize on that investment. Next slide. Because it really, for us and in this group and body, we talked a lot to you all about transit and land use, and that's how we got started as a transit agency, the Transit and Land Use Plan in 1998. We've continued that vision of integration of transit and land use to the current day with our adopted plans. Next slide. And that has continued even into our bus amenity and bus route and microtransit zone plans. So we have the 2030 Transit System Plan, and the Envision My Ride Plan that was adopted last year, and all are critical to the success of the Charlotte Transportation Center location. Next slide. We've shared with you how we got to this point at this current location. Back in the 90s, the main intersection of Charlotte, Trade, and Trine is where all bus activity occurred. That's where all transfers occurred at the time. The problems of that time was how do we have a single place for bus transfer and provide more amenities and shelter for our bus passengers. And we feel that this site did solve that problem and the issues that we had in those 90s. Next slide. But today we have a whole series of other problems that we want to solve with a potential redevelopment of this site. There's numerous conflicts if we think through today and how we think differently about pedestrian and bike and other types of access in and around this site. There are conflicts that we could seek to improve upon. Today, you have to cross through the facility, across multiple bus travel lanes to make that connection to the Lynx Blue Line or to the City Lynx Gold Line on Trade Street. The rail, Lynx Blue Line, and the rail trail did not exist when this site was put in place. So how do we better integrate both of those types of facilities into our redevelopment? And how do we, the long-stated goal of making Brevard Street really more of a festival street connecting the Hall of Fame, the Convention Center, to the Spectrum Center. Brevard Street is critical to that, and we have that opportunity with the redevelopment here. Next slide. Mobility expectations have certainly changed. We talked about microtransit a little bit. We've talked a little bit about electrical bus and how that fits into our broader strategy. And people's expectation is of more convenience and reliability in their system. All that needs to be folded in a new redeveloped Charlotte Transportation Center. Next slide. But to move forward, we must discuss how we are going to fund a project of this scale, how we find a temporary transit center to maintain continuity of operations, and how do we activate surrounding land uses to be kind of a true partner in that transit land use integration. Next slide. To go back a bit, how we got to this point. In 2019, we received some unsolicited proposals to redevelop the site. We went through a procurement process, and through that, 3 proposals were received, and we selected White Point Partners and Dart Interest as the developer to begin conversations with what a redevelopment of the Charlotte Transportation Center integrated with the mixed use could look like. Next slide. And we're very early in this process, as Mr. Cagle mentioned earlier, that as we think through the design of this, we selected a developer in 2019, some feasibility analysis I'll go through tonight, this public input process. As we get through with a staff recommendation tonight, if we're able to make that decision, then we can begin the other processes to advance this project, the environmental assessment, service equity, looking at the design and building out this facility in the later part of this decade. Next slide. But in order to be successful, we must have continuity in a temporary facility, elevate the transit rider experience that it's safe and secure, easy connections across the various modes, opportunity to include sustainability in the design of this facility, and integrating it with a mixed-use development. Next slide. In that feasibility analysis, we looked at many options were evaluated, looking at doing a site on the exact block of the CTC, but also utilizing blocks on the other side of 4th Street. Next slide. In that initial evaluation, we wanted to narrow that down to options that we could consider for advancing. And then the example here is showing you that evaluation between a total at-grade facility at the existing site, a terrace at the light rail level, and then a concourse, which would be below grade. And through this early evaluation process, we felt to meet the goals that stated previously that the at-grade facility, which is similar to what we have today, would not meet those goals as set forth. And we recommended on the next slide to, if we were given the opportunity, we could refine the terrace option, but also that in the purpose of the RAISE grant, which we were successful in awarding, we did submit the concourse option as the option to advance through that process. Next slide. So as we were successful in receiving that RAISE grant, we needed to go through this additional public involvement process for the selection of a locally preferred alternative. And through that process, we took 2 options out to the public to confirm the design to take forward. So we took the 2-level and a refined terrace option that we now call the 2-level terrace that was presented to TSAC, along with the concourse option. Key differences between these 2 options: more natural light on the concourse, on the 2-level terrace option. Bus operational flexibility is more on the concourse side, and then the climate-controlled space is a little bit different between the 2. I think key to recognize between these 2 options is the connection across the parcel across the street. The 2-level option would require a ramp coming from 3rd Street over 4th Street to the level at the light rail platform, and then it would be street level option for 6 bays. And then on the concourse option, it's all contained within a single platform with just a at-grade street connection connecting the two with a main entrance on 4th Street. Next slide. So as we go through the kind of finalizing this process, the path of recommendation was involvement with the public in October. We've presented you all the updates to that involvement, and then we have been doing a lot of outreach over the past month with presenting to the Transportation Planning Development Committee of Charlotte City Council, where they were endorsing of the staff recommendation, and we presented to TSAC and CTAC, and we're here tonight with our recommendation to you all. Next slide. By the numbers, the outreach that we presented to you in November, we had a lot of outreach at the pop-ups at the Charlotte Transportation Center, great involvement at our virtual public meetings, and over 100 bus operators were also engaged, and many surveys were completed by both of those groups of individuals. Next slide. Couple of images here to give you a little bit more detail of the options that were presented. This is the 2-level terrace option with a street level entrance off of Trade Street, and then the light rail level option here is where it says Great Hall, 8 bays connecting to the Lynx Blue Line. Next slide. Key differences between the two: transfer between bus routes we felt would be challenging on the 2-level terrace option. Imagine you having to go between 2 different levels to transfer to your bus. But it would be, at least for 8 bays, very easy access to the light rail platform. So that was certainly a pro for this option. Higher amount of natural lighting, but less climate-controlled space given the confines of the 2-level configuration. Bus routing would be complicated. You have an entrance off of 3rd with a ramp over to the higher level terrace option, and then a separate entrance for 4th. So bus route would be a little bit more complicated. Could be integrated with mixed-use development, but we felt not as efficient as the concourse option. And you see there with the high-level environmental screening that we felt there was low potential for negative human and natural resource impacts. Next slide. Here's a view of the concourse option as presented to the public. This is the below-grade option, so you can't see the transit center in this option. But I think what's important to note out, there would be a large kind of open-air entrance where you see concourse there going down to a flight of stairs to the concourse option. But as you see on the right-hand side, really ability to really maximize that integration for rail trail and Lynx Blue Line connections. Next slide. Simple transfer between bus routes, consolidated climate-controlled space, somewhat more easy to maintain security given just the one platform to monitor, more efficient bus routing. I feel it maximizes that development with this is a public-private partnership and see maximum opportunities there. We do feel like through the design process that we would have to look at careful attention to air quality, and paying careful attention to how we move through our electrification process and how do we be able to incorporate electrical charging with this facility. Next slide. In summary, the public feedback received was really close on both options. There were some key differences between the two. Bus-to-bus transfer was certainly stronger on concourse. Bus-to-rail was better on the two level. They're both going to be safe and secure options, more climate controlled on the concourse option and slightly more natural lighting on the 2-level terrace. The green check marks there indicate where the public came down on their surveys, and we did have slightly more indicating preference for the concourse option as indicated from the surveys that were completed. Next slide. We talked a little bit about, it was discussions about the financial framework. We're still working through the process of how the final evaluation of this financial framework will look. But we have indicated from the CAT standpoint, $12 million going towards primarily the temporary transit facility. The land value will also be incorporated with this project. And also we have $15 million in raised grant. There'll be additional funding that we'll seek through the city, through their CIP, and a conversation with the county for a TIG to kind of round out that financial framework. Next slide. And overall, the recommendation that we present to y'all, you must support the transit needs, but also the broader vision given the context of this current location of the site. Next slide. And mentioned before the engagement that we walked through each of the various committees and elected officials. On January 3rd, Charlotte City Council endorsed our staff recommendation, and we presented to both our citizen committees, and we're here tonight with action. Next slide. And that staff recommendation is that we recommend that the MTC adopt the concourse design concept as the locally preferred alternative for the purposes of the redevelopment of the Charlotte Transportation Center for many of the items that we list there as we see as true positives of this option compared to the 2-level terrace option. And next steps for this process is tonight, with hopeful approval of this design concept, and then we'll begin conversations, the framework for the public-private partnership, and then there's a timeline and conversations that we'll have to have with Charlotte City Council for the public-private partnership.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Let's start off with I did think we need a motion to begin the discussion. Do we have a motion to approve before we begin discussion and questions?
So moved.
We have a motion, second. Do we have a second? Second. Second. All right, now we'll open it up for questions and discussions.
Since they're both citizen task force, I'd like to hear from Chrissy and Edward on, weigh in on where we are from your groups.
So, I mean, we did a straw vote of the 6 people that had a preference. There was 4 with the concourse underground and 2 for the terrace. I mean, people have brought up lots of questions over the time. We've discussed this probably like 3 or 4 times in meetings. You know, it's pros and cons, right? I don't know that, I can't speak for everybody, but I don't know that anyone like is violently opposed to any of the options. So, you know, Jason laid out the pros and cons as a bus rider. I mean, you know, I have my own preference, but it's not perfect. So I think a lot of it will be like the execution. I think there's probably a greater risk to a poor execution of the underground one because, you know, there's some of the criticisms have been like you're hiding bus riders away, you know, and they tend to be lower income riders of color, and we're hiding them from the world. It's a little dramatic, but a lot of people do think that. And, you know, there's part of the upside for putting it underground is that you can do secure access, like you have to have a ticket to go in. I mean, is this a public space? Is that good or bad? The concern I brought up before about electric buses, if they're not all electrified, like how does that impact putting it underground? I mean, does that, I don't know, like how are you gonna deal with the exhaust? But yeah, there's pros and cons.
And from a CTAG perspective, the concourse was the choice that made the most sense. And more importantly, we saw it as, is this a decision based not only on today, but also the next 20, 25 years? Does it play well in the future? Because if we only look at what we see and have a vision for it as a today and tomorrow, then that's a very short-sighted visual. Cost is not so much a concern because if we don't make the right decision today, 20 years from now, we have to redo and find new land and new cost, and rail costs don't go up in years. They always, they don't go down, they always go up. So we saw the concourse as the better option for making this work. And also if we can get more federal money for doing the move in that manner, as I understand it to be, then that's also a great benefit as well.
Thank you.
All right. Mayor Higdon?
Yeah, just a comment. I can support the concourse option, but for me, air quality is going to be the main concern. And we've all been to cities throughout the country and across the world where you've been in a stuffy garage with diesel smoke spewing in your face, and it's a pretty miserable experience. So that's going to have to be key. There's going to have to be some great mitigation to make sure the air quality remains comfortable and breathable.
And I think the public-private economic development opportunities that come from that option are measurable, really. I mean, you don't know what the value of that is, but you know they have it a lot. So that's encouraging.
I would say too, the other piece too, not only the air quality, but the lighting. I've been in various places all over the world with the same scenario, right? You're going into a darker place with the fumes, et cetera. That's not what any of us want. So I think as you're going through the design process, making sure lighting, making sure that the air quality, those two pieces are paramount. And frankly, and you're talking about from an economic perspective, those utilizing that space are going to also demand it.
That's correct. Commissioner Altman?
Thank you. I'm interested on the financial framework, the TIG from the county, because I sit on the Economic Development Committee and I get the proposal at the very end. And sometimes I hear my colleagues say, we would have liked to have known sooner. So here I am on the other side of the equation, and I'm interested in the process. Like, have you already reached out to our economic development staff people? Like, is this already in process with the county? Is this something that's already sort of been, the way has been cleared so we can count on it to make this financial framework work?
In the earlier phases of this analysis, going back to when we submitted the RAISE grant, there were some early conversations, I understand it, between the two economic development groups. And so will be spearheaded by the city's Charlotte's Economic Development Office. So we can follow up to see where they are with that process right now as it stands.
Okay, yeah, I would like to know the involvement of staff, and I'm interested to know if staff has gotten it at the county. I'm pretty confident the commissioners haven't. And so I'm always looking to improve that sort of thing so that people are on board and don't feel blindsided on such an important piece of this plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely, we can follow up with that. And I would
wanna
add
make
to some of the
sure that I
comments that,
understand what is the information that,
My understanding is the yellow part of the financial framework, the $20 million TIG is the county.
it would have to be a
County
conversation
TIG?
with the county to have that.
And,
That's right.
right, so that's what I'm asking about.
Yeah.
okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions? I will say that the concerns that you've expressed are the same ones that many of the council members express. I think that what we also have really tried to talk about is the activization around the Spectrum Arena. And a large part of that is to have a look at what Brevard is now and making more public spaces to take advantage of the center city, access to the Performing Arts Center, more lighting than, and all of us have been to these trade shows lately that have these big kiosks and, how you put your hand up and it tells you the next place that you can get your coffee, things like that. So I think that in a large part that all of us have the same concerns, that we're not trying to make this a place that is what we would say ordinarily. I've been around when we stood at the front of Eckert's drugstore on the square, and when it rained, you had to go inside in the black and white towel on the floor. We've come a long way in terms of that. So I do believe that, my daughter lives in Washington, D.C., and they have underground, and they are clean, and they're well lit, they're secured. I think that there are some places that we can look at and say, would we do this or do better than? So I always like that idea of get some places that we can work with and say, how do we do this in a way? And I know that the staff has done some of that work. But I would say, and I would say that this community wants to have a quality, reliable, and safe system. And you do that starting with where people enter into it. And so this is going to be something that's going to be very important for us to do. And we all understand that, the weight of that decision. So with that, if there are no other questions, we have a motion on the floor and a second. All in favor of the recommendation, please raise your hands. All right, anyone opposed? All right, thank you very much. We've got a lot of work to do, and you guys have been really great at getting this information out for us today. So the next item that we have on the agenda is the Connect Beyond. Is Geraldine Gardner still on the phone? Geraldine, are you here or online?
I am, Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine. I think you probably know everyone in this room. This discussion is around advancing the Connect Beyond partnership between the COG and the MTC. I know that many of you are very much aware that the Central Iowa Council, Regional Council Subcommittee Advancing the Plan has been organized, and Kannapolis Mayor Darrell Hennett and myself are co-chairing this initiative, but I think there's 6 MTC members that are also on the commission. Raise your hand. I know that several were not available for our first meeting because you had conflicts. I mean, I tell you, it's a lot. I understand that. But I thought it might be good to talk about the Connect Beyond Advancing the Plan Subcommittee serving as a steering committee that is both working and implementing around the Connect Beyond Regional Plan, Mobility Plan. The committee, and I would say this between Geraldine and Mayor Hennett, that the very first thing that we thought about as we were trying to pull together this idea was that we wanted to have the opportunity to build trust in our region among our jurisdictions. That was one of the very first things that we wanted to do. But we also want to get some things done. So we want to do that. First, get to know each other, talk about what we think and what our plans are, what do we see as our future, but also to do that in a way that we can think about it beyond our jurisdictional lines. And I thought Mayor Dirch was on, but when he and Mayor Hennett are talking about a bus system now. One's got an on-demand service and one's got a fixed route service. And these are the kinds of things that we have as opportunities to work together to build coalitions that we may not have, but also, to build those as well as bring those collaborations that we do have to the table so we're aware of them. So the Connect Beyond is really to do that, but trust, information, communication, but also to try to determine what project we can work on that would actually make a difference. And our first meeting, we talked, the agenda talked about a couple of things. First, the objectives overall of the subcommittee was to advise on short-term opportunities for regional collaboration and determine feasible options for a regional mobility governance approach. To endorse a regional communications framework for Connect Beyond and support its implementation, and to collaborate to educate our state lawmakers on Connect Beyond and to advocate for local funding initiatives to make the plan work across our region. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Geraldine to see what I left out and what you want, additional things we want us to know. Geraldine?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm kind of in transit.
We can hear you
me
just
okay?
fine, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Well, you did a fantastic job of recapping the goals of the committee. We had really strong participation from across the region, as far away as Anson County, Stanley, Union, Gaston. We're working on confirming our Lincoln and Iredell County representatives, but it was a very strong start when it came to participation. For those of you who were not able to attend the meeting and for general information sharing to the MTC, tomorrow we'll be sending out a follow-up communication with a one-pager that recaps the goals of the committee, talks about some of the key discussion points from our first meeting. So that's a resource to our MTC representatives that can be shared out with the full MTC. I will just highlight, Mayor, that there was some interesting discussions that we had on several topics at the committee meeting. The first item that the committee discussed was a review of some of the work we did during the Connect Beyond planning process around models for regional partnerships and governance. And so we had some strong feedback from the group where we as a staff need to do further research and bring back other models for consideration and further analysis and reflection by the committee. That speaks to that first goal that Mayor Lyles mentioned that's more long-term in nature around governance. The second topic of discussion focused on what were the key message points that the committee feels is important to share with our state legislator around Connect Beyond and the local initiatives to implement key pieces of the plan. So we had a very robust discussion around that, and that will inform the legislative strategy around stakeholder engagement and communication. So we appreciate the participation and the interest for the MCC and look forward to following up after each meeting with sharing out some of the key takeaways. And as always, we invite your input and guidance as partners in this process.
Okay.
I'll turn it back to you, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. So aside from myself and Commissioner Altman and Mayor Bales and Mayor Knox, we have, I think, Marcus Jones is on this group, as well as County Manager Dean Diorio. I think that covers a lot of the membership that we have. But I want to say that we had small group discussions that were very, very effective. We had the city manager for Anson, or the county manager for Anson County, and you know the differences there. Just imagine what those conversations were about. But then we also had a great conversation, Mayor Reed, with Gastonia and Gaston County, and we had the conversations about models and what they might look like. And I thought Gaston County manager Kim gave us a great foundation for it when she talked about, you know, how do we work together on a comprehensive plan that we all agree upon, but allow for guardrails so that we connect things correctly, but also allow for autonomy, so that people could come when they were ready, but come knowing that they're working in a regional group. And I thought that was one of the highlights of this, of our presentation. But it was also interesting because we talked about all of these places where, how they govern, and almost every one of them was a union organized state. And I said, one of the things we have to do is look at what do you do in a right to work state versus having the, well, many of you lived in a lot of places where they're just different opportunities that you have when you have unionized labor, union labor. So there was a lot of just really tidbits that I think we talk about. So I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to ask Geraldine or myself any questions that I can give to Geraldine particularly. So any questions about the initiative and what's being done? I think our next meeting is in March, and I hope that people will be able to make it at that time. Any questions about it? I think it's truly one of the initiatives that will make a difference for this region, and I'm looking forward to everyone. So if we don't have any other questions, we do now have the, Geraldine, thank you for joining us. We'll look for information by email.
Appreciate it.
All right, the last.
We'll be following up.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're going to have Liz Babson. I can barely talk now. I know, it's been a long 2 or 3 days. Give us an update on our search for the new CEO of CATS.
Good evening, MTC. I'm happy to be here with you this evening. We're early in the process. Again, just real quickly, I'm Liz Babson. I'm an assistant city manager here with the City of Charlotte, working very closely with City Manager Jones to go through the recruitment process for the next CAT CEO. So we're real early in the process, but we want to make sure to keep this body updated as we go through that process. And so I'll give you a couple of pieces of information about where we are in the process and then talk about next steps, and happy to answer any questions that you might have. So we've hired Ralph Anderson and Associates as the executive search firm. We have already started working with him, and he's developing recruitment materials, including developing a job posting as well as interviewing key stakeholders, some of you sitting in the room with us this evening. And he's also developing a hiring strategy so that we have a good perspective on how we're going to move through this process in the coming months. So next steps for us are to post the position. We hope to do that very quickly because we are nearing completion of those materials. And we'll provide The executive search firm will also provide recruitment and outreach in addition to posting on all kinds of venues to get the word out across the country. This will be a national search. And then we'll move into evaluating candidates, and we'll define the interview process and panel selection. And I'll add, within the MTC's interlocal agreement, it specifies that the CEO is a City of Charlotte employee hired by the city manager with concurrence of the Mecklenburg County manager, as well as an MTC representative that would not be either Charlotte or Mecklenburg County, and that MTC representative is selected by this body. And with that, I'll take any questions that you might have.
All right, before we go to questions, I believe that the consultant will be interviewing every voting member of this body, so that's a good thing. But I think at some point, think about who we would choose to represent that's not the city or the county, so Lee and I are out. But I think begin to think about that, and you may want to wait until you read the survey results or the interview results before you make that decision. So with that,
May I ask a question?
yes.
So I thought that person already been selected. So what is the time frame to select that member, and what's the hope for time frame for the whole CEO selection process?
So 2 questions. The first question was about the MTC member that would be
Yes.
selected on the panel. Well, that's up for this body to decide. So we are just now posting. We're still early in that process, so you have some time to do that. Obviously, we don't know how long it will take us to go through this recruitment process. We're optimistic. We're the 15th largest city in the country, so we think we will get some national interest and attention in this recruitment process. We have a substantial transit system that not only includes bus, but rail as well. And so folks that work in that industry are really attracted to that kind of transit system. So we're, again, optimistic, but we'll keep this body informed as we progress through that process.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so I think that the expectation is that, as I said, everyone that's a voting member gets interviewed, and then maybe this is a question of when do we choose that next person? And I think, Liz, if we can get with the consultant to see what that timeline is, that will make a difference. And I say that because we have to adjust our MTC meeting in February, because the meeting is scheduled for the 22nd, which falls on the evening as the League Steak Dinner and steak. Did I say steak? Steak. State dinner. And it's also the day that the Alliance travels to Tampa for the inner-city visit, which I don't know. I think that I was thinking I could be in 2 places at one time, and I will not be able to be at the League State Dinner, and I am so regretful for that. I wanted us to have a good representation from Charlotte, but we're not, because most of us are going to Tampa for the League, for the, it's not the Chamber, the Alliance inner-city visit. So the question that we have is that the staff has looked at it, and we do not have anything that will require a vote in February. And given all of the work that we're doing, one of the questions that I'd like to put before you is that we not plan on having a in-person meeting, but if we need to have the appointment of the person for the search, then we would do a Zoom, if we're legally able to do a Zoom meeting with all the public notice. We will get some kind of option about that to see if we can, and if not, we may have to have a call meeting as soon as we get that time, but we'll communicate that with everyone. Does that seem reasonable to you? All right. I think it would be great, because in March, we would have the Connect Beyond meeting, and that, I think, will be a real plus to be able to have that discussion as well. So right now, our plan is to, I want to make sure I'm clear, we will not have a February 22nd meeting, because we'll be in Raleigh or in Tampa, and that we will adjust that meeting based upon the requirements of whether or not we need to vote to select or take any business up, and we'll advertise it and do that as quickly as we can. Brent, do you have anything else to add?
No, ma'am. I will say I will work with Brad Thomas, City Attorney's Office, to determine what the requirements are for designating that member of the MTC. It may not require a meeting at all. It may be something that can be conducted internally, via email or other things.
Yeah, thank you for that. Are there any other comments from those that are still with us online? Any other comments for this portion of our agenda? All right, any other comments from here? Mayor Higdon.
Yeah, I just have a quick comment. Shortly before Christmas, I was in a coffee shop in Matthews, and I ran into a friend that's a longtime CATS bus driver, and we started discussing how things were going. And I just wanted to share with CEO Cagle that he said he felt that the biggest heartburn among the drivers was a lack of communication, that they didn't mind that decisions had been made, but it wasn't adequately communicated to them in a timely manner as to why or maybe even at all. And so that was his number one complaint over anything else, over wages or whatever, just communication. And I wanted to share that with you and the MTC.
I actually want to compliment Brent because he has taken that on in the processes that we've had on identifying the changes in the line. For one of the very first things and first times, we actually had the operators come in, and it was small things like where do we have facilities to eat our lunch and a place to sit because things are changing. And that has been tremendous effort by this team to help us do that, and I think you'll see, you can see a visible difference. And even with the negotiations, I think we all understand that in this day of talent and workforce, you got to include people in decision-making. So thank you for bringing that up. Any other comments, Commissioner?
I just wanted to say that, Mr. Tillman, I was communicating with School Board Chair Dashu in the meeting, and I wanted to pass on the good news that they just approved their CMS representative, a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Wells.
Excellent.
Oh, we all know Jonathan. So, that's a small world. All right, so with that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Yes, we have a motion and everyone's in favor. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.